The soft hum of Paris stirred to life outside the tall windows of Camille's modest flat in Montmartre. Morning sunlight streamed through gauzy curtains, casting golden patterns across the wooden floor. The kettle whistled sharply, but Camille hardly noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the pale blue envelope she held in trembling hands. It had arrived that morning without warning. No return address. Just her name, written in a neat, slanted script she recognized all too well. Edouard's mother, Madame Laurent. Camille hesitated, heart racing. She had not heard from Edouard or his family in almost 4 months. Not since he had ended their engagement in the most abrupt, heartless way. The memory still burned behind her eyes. The dinner at his family's estate in Lyon, the sudden coldness in his voice, and the way his mother watched silently as he said the words, "It is over. I cannot marry you. My mother was right." No explanation. No room for questions. Now, a letter. Camille tore it open, fingers unsteady. Inside was a single cream-colored card, engraved with silver cursive. "Monsieur and Madame Laurent cordially invite you to the engagement party of Edouard Laurent and Mademoiselle Isabelle Moreau." She stared at the names, willing them to blur. But they remained sharp, cruel. Edouard was engaged. Already. To Isabelle Moreau, the daughter of a wealthy vintner family from Bordeaux. She remembered the name vaguely from a past conversation, a family Madame Laurent had once spoken of with reverence. Camille dropped the card as if it had burned her. The date was in 3 weeks. The location, Chateau Laurent, the grand estate where she had once imagined herself walking down the aisle. Where Edouard had once promised to build a future with her. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Why send her this? Was it mockery? A twisted show of pity? She sat on the edge of her bed, the silence in the flat pressing in around her. She picked up the envelope again, noticing a small handwritten note tucked behind the invitation. "I did not agree with how things ended between you and my son. You deserve closure. If you decide to come, I will be waiting." It was signed, simply Claire Laurent. Camille blinked at the name. Madame Laurent, the very woman who had, only months ago, whispered in Edouard's ear that Camille was not of their class. That she lacked the elegance, the refinement, the right bloodline. Why the change of heart? She pressed the note to her chest, heart pounding. Should she go? It was madness. But something deep inside her stirred, a need not just for closure, but for understanding, for answers. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to prepare herself for walking into a room where Edouard would be smiling beside another woman. 3 weeks to walk back into the lion's den. And this time, she would not be the girl who bowed her head and walked away. Camille stepped off the train in Lyon, the station brimming with movement and murmurs of arrival and departure. Her suitcase rolled behind her, the wheels clicking steadily against the smooth tiles. She inhaled deeply. The air was different here, crisper, tinged with memory. She had not set foot in Lyon since that night. The night Edouard left her without a second thought. She had walked away from Chateau Laurent under a veil of shame, heart shattered, dreams undone. Now, she returned not as a fiancée, but as a ghost from the past. A taxi waited for her just outside the station. She gave the driver the address, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. The drive through the countryside was hauntingly familiar. Vineyards stretched like green waves across the hills. Stone cottages blurred past the windows. Everything looked unchanged. And yet, she had changed. The chateau came into view as they rounded a gentle curve. There it was, grand, proud, and utterly cold. Its ivy-covered stone walls and towering windows stood like silent witnesses to all that had transpired. Camille paid the driver and stepped out. Her heels crunched on the gravel. She paused before approaching the door. A servant answered after a brief knock. His eyes widened slightly, but he stepped aside without a word. Inside, the hall was just as she remembered, polished floors, gleaming chandeliers, the scent of fresh roses filling the air. She half expected Edouard to appear at the top of the stairs, arms open, smile warm. But reality was colder. Instead, It was Madame Laurent who greeted her at the foot of the staircase. Dressed in a dark blue gown with pearls around her throat, she looked more regal than ever. "Camille," she said softly. "You came." Camille gave a slight nod. "I received your note." Madame Laurent studied her, something unreadable in her gaze. "I know I owe you more than just that. But I am glad you are here. There are things you need to see and know." Camille followed her into a small salon, the walls lined with books and faded portraits. A fire crackled gently in the hearth. "I must confess something," Madame Laurent said, gesturing for Camille to sit. "Edouard was not entirely honest with you, nor with me." Camille's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "He ended things with you because of something he thought he had discovered, something he believed would threaten the Laurent name." She paused, her expression tightening. "But he was wrong, and I fear it may be too late." Camille leaned forward. "What was it?" Before Madame Laurent could answer, hurried footsteps echoed from the corridor. The door burst open. "Edouard." He stopped short when he saw Camille, his face paling as if he had seen a ghost. "Camille?" His voice cracked. Silence hung in the room. She stood slowly, facing him with the composure she had earned in months of heartbreak. "I came for your engagement party," she said evenly. "Did you not expect me?" Edouard's eyes darted to his mother. "You invited her?" "I did," Madame Laurent said calmly, "because the past cannot be buried without consequence." Camille's gaze didn't waver. She was not here for begging or apologies. She was here for truth. But truth, she suspected, would be far more painful than lies. The silence in the salon lingered like a fog. Edouard stood frozen, as though time had stalled the moment he saw Camille. She, however, remained unmoved, her expression unreadable. "Camille," he repeated, quieter this time, as though saying her name might somehow undo what had been done. She tilted her head slightly. "You seem surprised. Weren't you planning to celebrate your engagement this weekend?" He took a slow breath and stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I didn't know my mother would." "Invite the woman you left without explanation?" Camille's tone was calm, too calm. "Well, here I am." Madame Laurent cleared her throat and stood. "I'll give you both a moment." Her heels clicked softly as she exited the room, leaving behind only the crackling fire and the weight of unfinished conversations. Edouard walked to the window, his back to Camille. Beyond the glass, the vineyard stretched across the hills, the vines glistening from a recent rain. "You shouldn't have come back," he said quietly. "I didn't come for you," Camille replied. "I came for clarity." "I deserve that much." He turned, finally meeting her eyes. "Clarity about what?" "That I broke things off because I had no choice? That I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me from what, Edouard?" she asked, her voice rising ever so slightly. "From your own cowardice?" His jaw tightened. "You wouldn't understand." Camille stood, stepping closer. "Then help me understand. Because from where I stood, you ghosted me after 5 years of love, after planning our future, after bringing me into your family like I belonged." He looked away, silent. Her voice softened. "What happened?" Edouard sank into an armchair, elbows on knees, rubbing his temples. "There was a rumor about your father, that he had been involved in something criminal, something that could ruin everything my family had built. The vineyards, the chateau, the legacy." Camille stared at him, stunned. "My father died when I was 16. What on earth could he have done that still mattered 10 years later?" "I believed it at the time," Edouard murmured. "I was told he had embezzled funds from investors. That if I married you, the scandal would surface. Our name would be dragged through the dirt." "And now?" Camille demanded. "Was it true?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Her voice was icy. "So you threw me away because someone whispered lies about a dead man." Edouard stood abruptly. "You don't understand the pressure. The vineyard is more than wine. It's the name, the family honor." Camille stepped back, her heart pounding. "You could have come to me, asked, trusted. But instead, you turned your back on everything we built together." There was a knock at the door. It creaked open, and a young woman in a crisp dress entered. Her face was delicate, her smile rehearsed. "Edouard," she said sweetly. "The guests are starting to arrive." Camille turned sharply. "The fiancé." Their eyes met. The young woman hesitated, sensing the tension. "I'll be out soon," Edouard said, forcing a smile. She nodded and disappeared down the hall. Camille looked back at him. "She's lovely. Does she know she was chosen to protect your name too?" Edouard said nothing. She walked to the door, hand on the handle. "I'll be staying in town for a few days. Don't worry. I won't ruin your little party." As she left the salon, she glanced down the corridor. Madame Laurent stood at the far end, watching. But she wasn't watching her son. She was watching Camille. And there was something in her eyes. Something that said the real truth hadn't yet come to light. The town of Saint-Emilion had grown quiet with the fall of dusk, its cobbled streets slick from a late afternoon rain. Camille leaned against the stone railing of her hotel balcony, her glass of red wine untouched. The scent of wet earth and crushed grapes drifted from the distant vineyards, mingling with the weight of her thoughts. She couldn't sleep. Not after what had happened in the salon. Not after the look Madame Laurent had given her, sharp, knowing, almost apologetic. Camille sipped the wine absently. It tasted of old memories and unspoken truths. The next morning, she walked to the chateau again, this time not as a guest, but as a woman on a mission. The staff recognized her, hesitated, then let her in. She moved through the familiar halls like a ghost, each step echoing against the polished floors. She found herself in the wine cellar, the one she and Edouard used to sneak into on summer nights, whispering promises over barrels of aging Bordeaux. But now it was colder, darker. The air felt heavier. A voice startled her. "Looking for something, mademoiselle?" Camille turned. It was Bernard, the head vintner, a kind-eyed man who had worked for the Laurents longer than anyone. "I used to love this place," she said gently. "It feels different now." He smiled faintly. "A lot has changed." She looked at him. "Bernard, was there ever really a scandal involving my father?" His face hardened. "That's not for me to say." "Please," she said, stepping closer. "Someone told Edouard a lie about him. A lie strong enough to make him leave me. I need to know the truth." Bernard hesitated. Then he motioned toward a smaller, older section of the cellar. "Come." They passed through a wrought iron gate into a narrow corridor lined with dusty bottles and old family ledgers. Bernard pulled out a leather-bound book from a shelf and opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "This," he said, pointing to an entry, "is from the year your father died." Camille read the line. Her father's name. A financial contribution. But it wasn't embezzlement. It was a loan. A large one. To the Laurent family. "This can't be right," she murmured. "He helped them." Bernard nodded. "The vineyard was on the brink of collapse after a failed harvest. Your father stepped in. Quietly. Proudly. He saved them." "Then why would they smear his name?"
"They didn't," Bernard said.
"Not at first. But when Edouard got serious about you, someone began to dig. There were whispers that a scandal could surface. Investors panicked. Madame Laurent panicked. She tried to push Edouard toward someone safer." Camille's heart pounded. So, it was her. Bernard's silence confirmed it. Camille closed the book gently. "Thank you." She left the cellar with a storm brewing behind her ribs. Outside, the sun pierced through the clouds, casting fractured light across the vineyard. Madame Laurent was in the rose garden, pruning the blossoms with delicate precision. Camille approached quietly. "You knew," Camille said. The older woman didn't look up. "About what, dear?" "That my father saved your family. That Edouard left me because of your fear." Madame Laurent placed the shears on the stone bench. "We are a family of legacy, Camille. Legacy is fragile. You wouldn't understand what it means to protect a name." "No," Camille replied, steady now. "I understand perfectly. You protect the name, even if it means destroying the truth." Madame Laurent finally looked up, her eyes unreadable. "You still love him." Camille didn't answer. Then you must choose, the woman said softly. Expose me and ruin him. Or stay silent and let him marry someone who doesn't know half the man he is. Camille stepped back, the taste of iron in her mouth. He deserves to know the truth. Madame Laurent picked up her shears again. Perhaps. But truth, Camille, is like wine. Sometimes it needs time to breathe, and sometimes it turns sour. As Camille turned and walked away, she knew one thing for certain. The engagement party would not end the way they planned. It was only the beginning. The air at Chateau Laurent that evening was tense with anticipation. Guests were arriving for the final dinner before the engagement announcement. The staff moved like clockwork, pouring wine, adjusting lights, setting tables with gleaming silver. Camille stood at the edge of it all, a silent observer cloaked in emerald silk and quiet determination. She had spent the day writing a letter. Not to Madame Laurent, to Edouard. A letter that told the truth about her father, about the loan, about the lie that tore them apart. She had sealed it with trembling hands and slipped it into the pocket of his dinner jacket before the guests began to arrive. She knew he would find it eventually, and when he did, he'd have no choice but to confront what he'd been made to believe. Inside the grand dining hall, laughter danced beneath the chandeliers. Camille took her place at the table opposite Edouard, who looked painfully elegant in black. His fiancée, Elise, chatted animatedly with the guests, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface of her perfect night. Midway through the main course, Edouard reached into his jacket for a handkerchief. His fingers brushed the envelope. Camille watched the moment he found it. The pause, the furrow of his brow, the quiet slide of paper against fabric. He didn't open it immediately. He waited until dessert. Camille slipped out onto the terrace as the final course was served. The moonlight spilled over the vineyard like milk. The soft strains of a quartet drifted from the open doors. She leaned against the cool stone balustrade, her breath catching at the sound of footsteps behind her. Edouard. He held the letter in one hand, his face unreadable. You wrote this? He asked. She turned to him. Yes. His eyes scanned hers, as if searching for cracks in her sincerity. Why now? Because I couldn't leave this place again, without you knowing the truth. He glanced down at the letter again. My mother lied. She was scared, Camille said. But you left me without asking. Without fighting. Edouard stepped closer. I thought I was protecting our legacy. I thought that I wasn't worth the risk. Her voice was steady, though her chest burned. I was wrong, he said quietly. They stood there, the vineyard stretching silent and endless before them. Somewhere inside, Elise was laughing with guests who didn't yet know the world was shifting. I'm engaged now, he said, the words hanging heavy. Camille nodded. I know. He looked down at the letter once more, then slowly folded it. She's a good woman. She is, Camille agreed. But she's not the one you walk through fire for. A silence settled between them, deeper than any words. I have to make a choice, Edouard said finally. No, she corrected. You already made one. The question is whether you have the courage to change it. He looked at her then, really looked, and Camille saw the man she had once known flicker behind his tired eyes. He reached for her hand, just briefly, before stepping back. I need time, he said. You don't have time, she replied. The announcement is tomorrow. Camille turned and walked away, her heart pounding, her heels echoing across the flagstones. She didn't look back. Inside, Elise raised her glass, radiant, unaware. And somewhere deep in the cellar, a storm was beginning to rise again. Morning came with a stillness that felt deceptive. Camille sat by the window in her guest room, watching the vineyard bathe in soft sunlight. Below, the estate was already humming with preparation, florists arranging white roses, tables being set under the pergola, champagne chilled. It was the day of the engagement announcement. Or so everyone believed. She hadn't seen Edouard since the terrace. She didn't expect to. She had said what needed saying. Now she would leave. Camille packed slowly, folding the dress she wore the night before with care, as though preserving the memory of it would make the pain more bearable. But just as she zipped her suitcase, a knock came at the door. It wasn't Edouard. It was Margot. The family's longtime housekeeper stepped in, looking as though she'd been up all night. "Miss Camille," she said softly, "Madame Laurent would like to speak with you." "In the conservatory." Camille's heart lurched. The conservatory was Madame's sanctuary, not a place for idle talk. She followed Margot down the winding corridor, past marble busts and oil paintings, until they reached the glass-paneled room, warm with morning light and the scent of jasmine. Madame Laurent stood by the piano, her hands clasped. She did not greet Camille with her usual measured smile. "I underestimated you," she said. Camille remained silent. Madame turned to face her fully. "You gave Edouard that letter. You've ruined everything." "I told him the truth," Camille replied. "The truth is irrelevant in our world. Appearances are what matter."
Stability.
"Legacy." "You mean control," Camille said, her voice level. The older woman's gaze sharpened. "You will leave. Quietly. Today." "I was already planning to." Madame stepped forward. "And you will not see him again." Camille met her eyes. "That's not your decision anymore." For a moment, they stood like opposing forces of nature, one cold and commanding, the other quietly resolute. Then a second knock. This time, urgent. Margot again.
Pale. "He's done it," she said.
He's told the guests. There is no engagement. Madame Laurent's expression collapsed for the first time in years. "What?" she whispered. Camille felt her breath catch. Margot nodded. "Edouard told them he can't go through with it." Elise left. The room fell into a stunned silence. Madame Laurent gripped the piano's edge. Camille turned and walked out. She didn't run. She didn't need to. Outside, guests were scattering in confusion, murmuring, champagne untouched. The announcement had unraveled like ribbon in the wind. And there, on the steps of a terrace, stood Edouard, waiting. He saw her through the crowd. Their eyes locked. But Camille didn't rush to him. Instead, she walked slowly, letting every second land like a heartbeat, like a decision made and remade 1,000 times. When she reached him, he spoke first.
"It's over," he said.
"With Elise." "I heard. I made a choice." Camille looked at him for a long moment. "Now you have to live with it." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. But her heart was cautious. The vineyard was quiet again. Yet nothing about them was quiet now. The aftermath of the announcement rippled through the Laurent estate like a storm moving out to sea, not destructive enough to leave wreckage, but turbulent enough to alter the shape of everything left behind. Camille sat beneath the sprawling fig tree at the edge of the vineyard, a basket of lavender clippings beside her. The workers, though polite, kept their distance. They whispered as they passed, glancing her way, uncertain whether to offer sympathy or suspicion. The truth was, she didn't know how to feel either. Edouard had made his choice, yes, but choices always came with consequences. Her quiet was broken by the soft crunch of footsteps on the gravel path. Julien. He approached with the easy confidence of someone who had never needed to impress anyone. A sketchbook tucked under his arm, sunglasses hanging from the open collar of his linen shirt. "You're the talk of the town, you know," he said lightly. Camille gave a weary smile. "Am I?" Julien sat beside her on the grass without waiting for permission. "Madame Laurent is entertaining 3 lawyers. Elise is rumored to be in Saint-Tropez. And Edouard," he paused, "is locked in the cellar with a bottle of brandy and some very confused wine merchants." "I didn't ask for any of this," she murmured.
"No."
"But you didn't shy away either. That counts for something." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the gentle rustle of vines in the breeze. Then, Julien opened his sketchbook and held it out to her. A charcoal drawing. Her. Not in a dress, not posed. Just Camille, barefoot in the vineyard, hair in a bun, holding a bunch of grapes and looking off into the distance. Honest.
Soft.
Camille stared. "I drew it before the dinner," Julien said. "When you were alone in the East Field. Thought you should see how someone else sees you." She looked up at him, unsure what to say. Julien shrugged. "I'm leaving tomorrow. back to All's. A gallery there wants a full series. She blinked. Congratulations. You could come with me. Just for a few days. Breathe different air. Camille hesitated. The invitation was simple, light, but there was something else underneath. Something unspoken. Julian, I know, he said gently. You're still tethered. He closed the sketchbook, but not coldly. Doesn't mean I can't offer you a door. He rose, brushing dust from his trousers. Don't wait too long, Camille. The world outside this estate is bigger than any secret it holds. As he walked away, Camille felt torn between the warmth of his offer and the weight of the past days. Her gaze drifted back to the vineyard, rows upon rows of carefully tended vines, bound by trellises just as she had been bound by expectation. That evening, Edouard knocked at her door. No tie, no jacket. Just him, sleeves rolled, expression raw. I wanted to see you, he said. Camille let him in. They stood by the fireplace, neither speaking at first. I thought I knew who I was supposed to be, Edouard began. All my life, I've followed a path laid out for me. By my mother, by the estate, by legacy. He looked at her. But not by my heart. She felt her breath catch. I hurt you, he said. And I'm sorry. But I can't undo the past. All I can do is offer you the truth now. Camille's voice was barely a whisper. And what truth is that? That I love you. Not the version of you that fits into this place. You. With your questions, your stubbornness, your damn courage. His hand reached for hers again. And this time, she let it linger. But even as she looked at him, Julian's words echoed in her mind. Don't wait too long. Because love was a choice. And so was freedom. The morning sun broke through the shutters, painting gold lines across the tiled floor. Camille sat at her writing desk, Julian's sketch propped beside her like a quiet companion. Her fingertips traced the grain of the paper, pausing at the lines that shaped her own face. Next to it lay an envelope, postmarked from All's. She had received it just that morning, delivered with the post as if it were no more than an ordinary letter. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. She unfolded the page. Camille. The light here is sharper than in Bordeaux. It makes colors bolder and shadows deeper. I thought it would be a good place to forget you. But instead, I find you in every stroke. I don't expect you to follow me. I only ask that you don't settle for being a ghost in someone else's story. You deserve to be the author. Julian. Camille closed her eyes. She could almost smell the lavender fields outside All's, hear the distant chatter from open-air cafes, taste the salt in the southern breeze. A knock at the door broke the reverie. Edouard. He entered cautiously, a bundle of fresh figs in his hand, as if peace could be offered in fruit. I thought we could have breakfast together, he said. Camille nodded and gestured toward the terrace. They sat in the warm morning light, the vineyard stretching below them like a sea of green. He poured her coffee and filled her plate with ripe figs and bread still warm from the oven. For a while, they didn't speak. It was not silence filled with tension, but one heavy with what remained unsaid. Then Edouard set his cup down. My mother's going to Paris for a while. She says she needs time to think. Camille raised an eyebrow. And what does that mean? That she lost, he said with a faint smile. And she knows it. Camille nodded slowly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I'm not asking again, he said. Not yet. But I want you to know the ring is here. If you're ready. He placed it between them on the table and didn't push it any further. Camille looked down at the box, then up at him. And what happens if I never am? She asked. Edouard held her gaze. Then I'll still be here. But I'll never hold you back. The words surprised her. For the first time, he wasn't trying to control the outcome. He was simply waiting. That evening, Camille wandered the vineyard alone. The same path where Julian had first spoken to her. The same rows of vines she had walked as a girl, dreaming of anything but this life. She came to the old stone wall at the edge of the estate, where the land dropped steeply toward the river. The sky was streaked with violet and gold, the kind of sunset that seemed to promise something just out of reach. And in that quiet, something in her shifted. She turned and walked back to the house, her pace slow but certain. In her room, she packed a small bag. No goodbye note. No explanation. Just the ring box left behind on the table unopened. At the station the next morning, she boarded the early train heading south. As the countryside slipped by, her mind was quiet, not because she had all the answers, but because she had finally made a choice that belonged only to her. Julian had given her a door. She had decided to walk through it. The train rumbled steadily, its rhythmic motion lulling Camille into a state of calm. The landscape shifted from the cultivated rows of vineyards to the wild expanse of the southern French countryside. The air outside seemed thicker, laced with the scent of salt from the sea that was never far in this part of the world. She didn't know exactly where she was heading, only that she was moving forward. Moving beyond the comforts of Bordeaux, beyond the life she had almost chosen. The train pulled into the small station at Alls in the late afternoon. The sun was a fading orb, casting long shadows on the cobblestone streets. Camille stood on the platform, taking in the town she had heard so much about in Julian's letters and stories. He had described the place as though it were alive. The streets, the colors, the very air. And now, standing here, she could feel it. There was something in the air that made her believe that something beautiful, something profound, could happen here. She stepped off the platform, pulling her suitcase behind her, and found herself walking toward the center of town, guided by instinct rather than any real direction. The streets were narrow, the buildings old, but charming. It felt like a place where time moved slower, or perhaps more urgently, depending on how you looked at it. The cafe on the corner was exactly as he had described it, a place where the conversation was as vibrant as the orange-painted walls. Camille hesitated at the door before pushing it open. The soft chime of the bell above the door drew the attention of a few patrons inside. The waiter, a young man with a ready smile, greeted her in rapid French. Camille smiled back, though she was certain her accent made it clear she was a stranger. She asked for a table, and he led her to a corner near the window. The cafe was quiet, with only a few scattered patrons, each lost in their own worlds. Camille ordered a coffee and sat, her mind still focused on the letter she had received. The words Julian had written. They echoed in her head. You deserve to be the author. Did she? Did she deserve to be the one who made her own choices, who created her own story? As if on cue, the door swung open, and a familiar figure entered.
Julian.
He looked the same, but somehow different. There was a wildness in his eyes now, a kind of restlessness that hadn't been there before. He spotted her immediately, and his lips curved into a smile that made her heart skip a beat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as though the weight of the past hung between them, refusing to let go. I didn't expect you to come, he said, his voice quiet but filled with emotion. I wasn't sure if I was ready, she replied honestly. But I think I am now. Julian sat down across from her, his eyes searching her face, as if trying to read the pages of a story he had never been able to finish. I never wanted to hurt you, Camille, he said. But I was running from the truth. I thought that leaving would give me freedom, but it only made me realize how much I needed you. Camille felt her chest tighten, but she forced herself to breathe, to listen. I thought I was lost, he continued, but I'm not anymore. Not with you here. She reached for her coffee cup, her fingers brushing the rim as she tried to find the right words. The air between them felt charged, like the moments before a storm. I came here to find something, she said slowly, and I think I have. But I don't think it's the same thing you're looking for. Julian's brow furrowed, confusion clouding his features. What do you mean? She leaned forward, locking eyes with him. I came here to find myself.
Not you.
Not anyone else. Just me. The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick, until Julian nodded slowly, a look of understanding washing over his face. I think I understand, he said softly. You always did know how to see through everything, Camille. Camille smiled, the tension in her chest easing for the first time since she had left Bordeaux. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the soft murmur of the cafe and the distant hum of the town outside. It felt as if they were both in the midst of a quiet epiphany, each discovering a piece of the puzzle they had been searching for. When Camille finally stood to leave, she felt lighter. The weight of the past had not disappeared, but it no longer defined her. There was a future ahead of her, one she would create herself. "I'm not sure where this goes from here," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm ready to see where it takes me." Julian stood too, his expression a mixture of admiration and sadness. "I'll be here," he said, "whenever you're ready to write the next chapter." And with that, she walked out of the cafe, her heart no longer torn between two worlds. She was free to write her own story. The morning light filtered through the open windows of the small apartment Camille had rented in Alls. The soft, golden hue seemed to mirror the sense of peace that had settled in her heart over the past few weeks. She had found the rhythm of the town, the slow, unhurried pace that allowed her to reconnect with herself in ways she hadn't thought possible. Every day brought something new, a new street to explore, a fresh conversation with the locals, a chance to finally, truly breathe. The noise of Bordeaux, the demands of the life she had left behind, felt distant now, almost like a memory that belonged to someone else. But it wasn't just the town or its people that had helped her heal. It was the distance, both physical and emotional, from everything that had once held her captive. She wasn't running anymore. The sound of footsteps from the hallway brought her back to the present. A knock at the door followed shortly after. Camille smiled to herself, knowing who it was before even opening it. Julian stood on the other side, a simple bouquet of wildflowers in his hands. His hair was a little longer now, and the edges of his shirt were a little frayed. But there was something in his eyes that had shifted, a quiet confidence, a steadiness. "I thought I'd bring you these," he said, holding out the flowers. "A little something to brighten your day." Camille took them with a soft laugh, noticing how easily the gesture felt now. How far they had come from the awkward, uncertain encounters they had shared in the past. "Thank you," she said, taking a moment to inhale the earthy fragrance of the flowers. "They're beautiful." Julian hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "I wanted to say that I'm proud of you. For everything. For choosing yourself. For finding your own path." She looked at him, the words sinking in. It was the first time in so long that anyone had said anything like that to her. "I couldn't have done it without this place," she replied softly, her gaze shifting to the view of the town below. I think it's finally starting to make sense." Julian nodded, his eyes softening. "You've always been strong, Camille. You just had to remember that." The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. Rather, it was filled with understanding. The tension that had once existed between them had melted away, leaving behind only a mutual respect, a quiet acknowledgement of a journey they had both been on. "I don't know what's next," Camille continued, her voice thoughtful. "But I'm not afraid anymore." Julian smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You don't need to know. Just keep going. The path will reveal itself." They stood there for a moment, not needing to say anything more. The unspoken bond between them was enough. In that moment, Camille knew that she had come full circle. She had arrived where she was meant to be. "I'll never forget everything you taught me," she said softly, looking at him one last time with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. He stepped forward, placing a gentle kiss on her forehead, an acknowledgement of everything they had shared and everything they hadn't. "You're welcome. Take care of yourself, Camille." With one last lingering look, he turned and walked down the hall, his steps echoing in the silence of the apartment. Camille closed the door softly behind her, turning back to the sunlight streaming in through the windows. She felt, at last, like she was home. Not in a place, but in herself.
And that was enough.